Good morning. You guys have a good day so far? Yeah. Cool. Can you guys bring up the house lights so I can see these nice people? There you are. Okay. We've been, last several weeks, if you've been with us, we've been going through, last 4 weeks, we've been going through all the stuff that led up to Jesus entering Jerusalem and those fateful events that happened that resulted in his rejection and death. But 5 days before he died, it looked like nothing was going to stop Jesus and his contingent. I mean, it was the Sunday of that week, he and his crew, you could say they had the pedal to the metal. I mean, they were just rolling into the capital city of Jerusalem and with vigor, vitality, and everybody was buoyant. The crowds were thinking, this is going to be it. It's going to happen now. Everything we've been working for the last 3 years, he's going to use his charisma, he's going to use his oratory, he's going to use the miraculous powers that we've seen him demonstrate and to overthrow these Roman occupiers and get them out of our country. And that his was a nationalistic movement that was empowered by God. The movement was confident, it was triumphant, and the faith of Jesus' people was climaxed. It absolutely was. And this was especially true for those that were closest to him. They'd spent 3 years traveling with him. They'd seen him do much, really. And the movement seemed like it was ushering in the full potential of all that they believed they'd been working for, and that is the establishment of God's kingdom here on earth. And the crowds laid out the red carpet treatment for him. They took off their coats, laid them down the road. They put palm branches on the road. As he triumphantly entered in, the faith was supercharged. The momentum was unstoppable. And you know what he rode to go into the city? A donkey. Doesn't that sound impressive? Yeah, right? He coming in on a donkey, okay? And it's what they had, you know. But to them, it felt more like they were cruising in on this thing. That's a 74 Cadillac Fleetwood. That car, imagine trying to parallel park this thing. It was over 21 feet long, okay? It was big, it was heavy, it was powerful, and people believed it was just like the safe thing to be in. If you're going to get in an accident, you want to be sitting in the middle seat in the back on one of these things, right? That had this momentum and this power, and that was what they were feeling. That this momentum, and this ride, though, that they were on was actually headed for a big crash. It was going to be a catastrophic one. It was going to be a fatal hit. And the movement was on a collision course with what seemed like an immovable object, and that is the political power structures of the day. It was going to be a devastating hit, and it was going to seem unsurvivable. A passenger in a car like that, just still up there, no, not that car. There it is. If you're riding in a car like that, you're going to feel safe, right? They're big, they're heavy, they're powerful, but it turns out a vehicle like that isn't as safe as it seems. Let me explain why. They're not as safe as today's cars. Here's why. For understandable reasons, the engineers that designed cars like that, they were built heavy with rigid steel construction in the whole frame from tip to stern, right? And it was simply the idea that if you want to protect the occupants, put a really strong frame around them, have a lot of weight going their way, have this rigidity to hold up, and the weight would give the occupants maximum protection in a collision. But it turns out it was a faulty idea, okay? The way those engineers didn't consider something, they didn't consider the way energy of a collision would transfer through the vehicle, that frame, the heavy steel frame, to the vehicle's occupants, okay? It turns out it was a faulty idea, okay? The rigid design on a catastrophic hit would transfer all of that energy of the hit into the bodies of the occupants. There was nothing to stop it from transferring, and it resulted in terrible injuries and oftentimes death. Modern cars are designed differently, okay? They're often smaller, they're lighter, but they're actually safer. Instead of having a rigid frame from one end to the other, modern cars have two kinds of structures. Okay, on the front and the rear, they have these softer, compressible zones called crumple zones. They collapse and they absorb some of the hit of like a head-on collision or hitting some immovable object. And then in the center of the car, where the occupants actually sit, That's where the steel cage is. The safety cage of steel surrounds them. So the crumple zone absorbs a lot of the energy of the hit, and then the amount of energy transferred to that rigid cage is lessened, so that you have this protection and survivability inside that thing. Jesus understood crumple zones. He had a faith and a ministry that had crumple zones in its very design. When he rolled into Jerusalem that week, the whole affair seemed big, heavy, unstoppable, but a collision was coming. And by the middle of the week, that was Sunday, and then by the middle of the week, when it started to become clear that Jesus wasn't going to do what they expected, that when it became apparent that to the watching public opinion changed. Aren't you glad public opinion doesn't change anymore? Right? I mean, we're nothing but a bunch of spacemen, or a bunch of cavemen dressed up in spacesuits, I'm telling you. When it became clear that he wasn't interested in using his abilities to create this nationalistic movement that they had hoped for, in fact, he refused to do it, the mood changed, and public opinion shifted away from him. It's that by Thursday, the crowds decided they were done with him. And you see, Jesus had these really powerful enemies. They were the religious elites of the day. And these folks wanted him dead. They were moralistic, but they had actually been plotting his death. They wanted him to be killed. And they wanted him killed for a bunch of reasons. One of the reasons was that he was violating constantly their traditions and the norms in their culture. And they didn't understand why. And he was challenging their positional authority. And he was making claims that showed that he kind of considered himself to have some kind of equality with God. He'd do things like forgive sins, which only God can do. And they were becoming jealous of his popularity. People liked him more than they liked them. And he was openly accusing them of not being all that they thought they were. That he was openly accusing them of hypocrisy. And I mean, let's be honest, they were. I mean, they were moralistic, right? But they're plotting his murder at the same time. But of all of those reasons, the one that's cited most in the historical documents we have of Jesus' life is they were consistently upset with the way he was violating their tradition and their culture. He would allow their traditions and cultures to be crumpled, to be crushed. And it was true. Often he would forego the rules and the norms of society because he viewed traditions and cultures as crumple zones of faith, not core ideas of the faith. In other words, if cultural practices got in the way of protecting people, then they were supposed to be overlooked and abandoned. To Jesus, the most important thing was to protect the ability of God's people, of all people, to experience God's love and his truth. And this brought him into direct conflict with these religious leaders because they looked at their role as policing and preserving the culture and traditions of their day. And so they opposed Jesus, and because he prioritized human need over these rules-based kind of regulations. Let me give you a few examples. He had this miraculous power that was undeniable. Even the people that were against him couldn't understand how he was healing people and doing all this stuff. But what they had a problem with is sometimes he would heal people on the day nobody was supposed to work. And so he would heal people, do good for people on this day called the Sabbath, and they're like, you're breaking all the rules. Think about that for a second. He's exercising supernatural power, and they're being critical of him because he's breaking the rules. How about if you come over here and heal this guy? You know, because their rules were all about following the traditions and the culture, and his rule was the rule of love. So he would do this stuff for people no matter what day it was, and he was criticized for it. They had these people that had these conditions called leprosy. It's this horrible skin disease, and when a leper was relieved of their condition, they didn't call it a healing, they called it a cleansing, because the condition that you were kind of considered to be dirty. And what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to stay away from the whole community, any contact with those people. And Jesus, when he would heal somebody, when he would cleanse a leper, instead of just doing it with a word like he was capable of, he'd actually do it with a word and a touch. And they're like, he's breaking the rules. You're touching something that's unclean. And he broke the rules because he wanted them to know they're welcome back in to community with other people. When the irreligious or the respectable would show interest in the things of God, he didn't tell them, yeah, well, come to my Bible study or come to my church and you can sit and listen to me, or something like you people did, you know. He said, no, I'm going to go where you are. He went and hung out with these people in their bars, at their parties, in their homes. He'd go wherever they were because he was interested in giving them God's love and truth in a place where they were. He was willing to enter into those places. And so the religious, uptight people accused him of hanging out with sinners. What are you doing being with those people? And when the confused or the curious had honest questions about God's love and whether he cared for them or not, or about his love and his truth, he didn't lecture them or give them pat answers. He would ask them questions and try to engage them in a learning process that would lead them to a place of self-discovery, that they would understand things and really own them. And so he engaged them and he drew them out to this place so that they could understand God's eternal truths. But for Jesus' enemies, here's what was going on this last week of his physical life. It was they wanted him dead, but he was so popular because of the way he operated in the world. People loved him, and so the religious leaders held back. They restrained themselves because of his popularity. But by Thursday, when they saw that the crowds were done with him, they said, this is our opportunity. And so the religious elites came up with a plan to kind of trick the Romans, paint them into a corner where they had to put him to death. And on Friday of that week, their scheme worked. They killed Jesus because he practiced a faith that had crumple zones. They couldn't handle it. And he was always protecting what was most important. So on Sunday, when they came in, they felt as safe as somebody in a 74 Cadillac Fleetwood, okay? Just rolling into town, big, heavy, powerful. With him at the wheel, they were like, oh my gosh, we can do anything, okay? They felt safe, they believed that nothing could stop them. But on Friday, the unthinkable happened. That big, heavy, powerful movement that moved into the town on Sunday crashed, and it killed the driver. The driver was dead. And so imagine, especially for those who are closest to him, they had disrupted their whole lives. They had spent 3 years traveling with him and doing all these amazing things, and now he was dead. And the sun was going down on Friday night. They were filled with this bewildering doubt, and they were scared. They were really fearful. And have you noticed that this is true? When you had a really bad day, the next morning, the sun came up anyway. And that's what happened on Saturday. The sun rose, but on Saturday, they're facing just an unthinkable existence now. They didn't know what to think. On Saturday, they didn't know how to feel. They didn't know what to think. They didn't know what to do. And I mean, they spent 3 years, and now it's like they believed he was special, and he was leading this transformational movement. They had had amazing experiences, and now it was over. It was just over. And so by Saturday, their faith was confused, it was questioned, it was unsure. And on Saturday, they didn't feel safe because they had killed their leader. And so the question is, are we next? Are we part of that threat to them? And so here's the thing. When they crucified him, when they put him on that cross, the people that did it believed it was a fatal hit. That this was over. We're finally done with him. But what they didn't understand was who they actually nailed to the cross. That we understand now, it was actually the physical manifestation of the eternal God. And they couldn't touch what was safe inside of him. They couldn't touch the eternal God, but they could touch the shell in which the eternal God was operating in. And his body was a crumple zone. And that kept what was inside safe. The people that witnessed Jesus' death didn't know it at the time, but he got crushed. The way he got crushed was actually by design. That was how it was supposed to work. They didn't know it at the time, but his death was actually a kind of crumple zone that was designed to absorb the destructive impact of all that is wrong in the world. His followers also thought that he was done, that this was the end of the movement. And when he died, it seemed that Jesus and all he stood for was a complete loss, catastrophic wreck. And later they came to understand that his death was designed to protect humanity from the full force impact of sin and pain, evil, and death that exists in this world. His death took the hit that we deserved, that was threatening us. He provided for us a place of safety and a place of survivability. And you see that they later understood that though his body was crumpled in suffering, and though his body was crumpled by death, they later discovered that his suffering and death were actually crumple zones to keep us safe, that it was all by design. But something convinced them that this was true. Something convinced them of it, and it was this. Let me read it. This is Luke's account of what convinced them. It says that, so that next Sunday, they put him in the tomb on a Friday. That next Sunday morning, the women who saw where Jesus had been buried, which tomb he had been put in, came back out there with preparations for his body to give him a proper burial. The thing had been rushed on Friday because the sun was coming down and the Sabbath was going to start. Sunrise came, and now all of a sudden they could get out there and they could work again. And so they went out there, but when they went in, what first happened was they went to the tomb, and imagine this, it's like a small cave, and they rolled a stone in front of it. And when they came back, the stone was rolled away, and there's just an open, gaping tomb. What would you do? Well, what they did was they crept inside. Creepy, right? And they went inside, and they looked, and his body was gone. And as they stood there, they were completely confused. All of a sudden, these two dazzling creatures appeared, just in dazzling robes, the text says, and the women were terrified. And they're in a tomb, and all of a sudden there's just like these angelic beings in there, and they fell on the ground, and these beings said, why are you looking for the dead among the living? The one you're looking for, who was dead, is now alive. He isn't here. He's risen from the dead. Well, this just confused them beyond means, okay? But they said, remember, he told you this a bunch of times. He told you that what was going to happen was he was going to be put to death, okay? And that he would rise again on the third day. And then they remembered, yeah, he had said that a bunch of times. So they rushed back to the tomb to tell the 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. These people were all in hiding. And so these women came back and told the apostles, the 11, that because they lost Judas in the way, it told them what had happened. And because they were dumb guys, know what their response was? That sounds like nonsense coming from these gals. And so it says that they didn't believe. They didn't believe it. However, Peter was going, I'm going to go check myself. And so he ran to the tomb. He looked inside. He saw the stuff that they had wrapped him in, and that was still there, but the body was gone. And he was just utterly confused, wondering what was happening. Then in Luke's account of this, what happened next was he focuses on these two guys that had been in the city, had been a part of this movement, and now they were discouraged, and so they were going home to this town called Emmaus. And these two guys were walking on the road, and all of a sudden this other guy appears and starts walking with them, and they don't know who it is. And through this long interaction they had with him, what they started to realize was, oh my, this is Jesus. This is Jesus. They were completely confused. And so when they went back into the city, and they wanted to tell everybody that they had seen Jesus. And so these two from Emmaus told their story about how Jesus had appeared to them as they were walking along the road, and how the different things that happened made them realize that this was him. And just as they were telling them about it, all of a sudden Jesus himself was standing in their midst among them. And to this freaked out group of people, he said, peace, peace, peace be with you. And the whole group was just scared spitless, okay? And they were thinking they were seeing a ghost. Why are you frightened? He said, why are your hearts filled with doubt? And he shows them his hands with the wounds for the stakes that were put in, and the wound on his feet for where they had stuck that through him, and you can see that it's really me. You can touch me if you want, so that you make sure that I'm not a ghost. I have a body. Ghosts don't have bodies, as you see that I do. And as he spoke, he showed them his hands and his feet, and they stood there in disbelief, but also, it says, with wonder and joy. They're like, what is going on? And then he asked them, do you have anything for me to eat? He wanted to prove to them that he wasn't a ghost, that he actually had a physical body. So they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it in front of them, and they were just absolutely blown away. And so through many other experiences, for 40 days, he kept showing up, teaching them, revealing himself, revealing God's plan to them. But what they came to believe through this experience they had with the resurrected Christ, what they came to realize was, his suffering was necessary, but it actually proved nothing. They came to realize that the rejection that he had experienced from all the people, that it was really necessary, but it proved nothing. And that the death that he died on our behalf so that we could be forgiven. But where was the proof that this was actually true? Well, the proof was in the resurrection. The resurrection was the thing that proved everything. By his resurrection, it proved that his death destroys our death. In his resurrection, because he was resurrected from the dead, the people that rely on his death and his resurrection, that they have a resurrection coming too. That everybody that puts their faith in that they have a resurrection coming too. That even though their bodies, their physical bodies might crumble, and as I look around this room, there are some people whose bodies are crumbling. Right? I mean, look at me. And I don't even know who that is in the mirror anymore. Do you feel the crumble? For you young guys, I mean, kind of give me a break. They're like, what are you talking about? I promise you, your day's coming. Okay? Though our physical bodies crumble, and eventually, the death rate is still 100%, guys. Okay? Mortuary business is the business to be in. Okay? But though our bodies eventually crumble, we all that put our faith in him, that we have a resurrection coming. His resurrection proved, that everything he taught us also from God was true. He spent 40 days teaching them. Here's one text that speaks about it. And we don't have a lot of the text. We don't know a lot of the stuff he said, but we have some examples. He says, when I was with you before, I told you that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms must be fulfilled. And it says that he opened their minds to understand these truths. And he said it was written long ago that the one that was going to come and fix what was wrong with humanity and this physical world we live in would suffer and would die, but would rise again on the third day. This had always been the plan. This had been the design that God had put into the very fabric of the universe. His resurrection proved that the values that he lived with, that the values he asks his followers to live with, are the key to a well-lived life. During those 40 days, he spent time teaching them. He was preparing them for the movement that they were now going to carry forward. This was going to be their job. And by the way, we're a part of that movement just by gathering here together this morning. He said it was written that this message would be proclaimed in the authority of the Messiah's name to all nations beginning in Jerusalem. And because the death Jesus died was a crumple zone designed to keep us safe, he told them to give this message. He said, there is forgiveness of sins to all who will simply do the one thing everybody can do and so many people won't do, and that is bow the knee and ask for that forgiveness. To say, Lord, it's not them, it's me. I'm a part of the problem of what's going on in this world. And because they saw him, he reminded them, you were witnesses of all this stuff. You saw all the things we did. And now because you saw it, it's your job to continue the work that I began in this world. They had witnessed everything he did. And here's the most important thing, the way he did it. The way he did it. Jesus had given them a model. And the core that all he stood for was rigid. It was like that rigid safety cage inside a modern vehicle. And that commitment that he had was to love and to truth. Never truth over love. They go together. They go together completely. Love and truth are protected at all costs. His core message was solid and it was uncompromising. It was rigid in this commitment to love and truth. But surrounding that core, okay, are crumple zones. Okay, what kind of church do you like to go to? Oh, wow, there's all different kinds, right? Whatever you want. There's all different flavors. It's like a big thing of ice cream. Okay, some people it turns out like Tutti Frutti. Who would have known? And some people like plain vanilla. And it's like, well, that's fine if that's what you're into. But that stuff doesn't matter. The flavors don't matter. But what matters is having, being allowed to crumple whatever it is that surrounds these core truths. And sometimes we have to sacrifice our religious preferences and traditions for the sake of love and truth. Does that make sense? Sometimes we have to push aside and redefine social norms and that, so that the love and truth of Christ can penetrate into the lives of others, so that we can give them that example and that transcends culture and differences that exist between us, so that people can understand that, no, this isn't just for some people just like us, it's for all people. And now they were tasked to go out there and do the same, to do that, and to imitate the way he showed intrinsic value in the life of every human being and adopted a whatever it takes approach to meeting human need. Because what the most important thing is, we need to help people understand that God values you. He really does. And he's willing to help, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done. It makes no difference whatsoever. We're all the same. Does that make sense? Good. Don't make me repeat it, because it would be way too much. Let's pray. Lord, we pray that you'd help us to live the kind of life that you lived, to see that intrinsic value in human beings, to value people over our traditions and our culture. And if necessary, help us to be willing to crumple that which makes us, even the stuff that makes us comfortable, for the protection and benefit of others. Make us people who keep love and truth. Make us get that right, put that inside the cage, and being willing to crumple all else. Lord, we thank you that we are grateful that you were willing to crumple your body for our sake, and that your resurrection proves that we're safe in you, in the cage of protection that you provide for us. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.